I've got Dr. Paul Fadale from University Orthopedics in studio with me, and you know what that means. That means we have injuries to talk about. Unfortunately, four-time MVP Aaron Rodgers goes down on Monday Night Football with an apparent, at the time, ankle injury. We know now a torn Achilles, fully torn is the report. Can you explain to the viewers who might not know the different grades or levels of this kind of injury?
In general, they try to estimate how bad the tear is, but in a way it's kind of silly. To some degree, it's like an ACL. It's either intact or it's gone. When the Achilles tears, it's gone. It doesn't function. He can't run. He can't move. Functionally, it's completely torn. And
Dr. Fadale, did you happen to watch the video, see any photos of the injury as it happened?
Well, it's interesting. When it first happened, it didn't look like much of an injury. And, you know, getting up slow and then all of a sudden say, wait a minute, what did just happened? And I saw some pictures afterward, and then you can see when they stopped the action, his foot and ankle were bent over really badly. I said, oh my God, there's just no way that thing couldn't have torn. And so sadly, 4 plays into what his career in New York, major injury.
Yeah, and out for the season, that's the report. What is the typical timetable that he can get back to football activities and potentially return to play?
So this is where it gets ugly. People are going to Google it and say, Google answers 4 to 6 months, you're ready to go. 4 to 6 months to do what? Not to play in the NFL. So the average in the NFL is 9, 11 months up to a year later. Now we dig a little bit deeper, 30% or so of those athletes will never come back. That is a devastating injury because, again, the power and the grace of those athletes can't be made up at that level. It just can't. So even a year later, 1/3 of those athletes, they don't come back.
And especially someone of his age, how much of a concern is it that Aaron Rodgers will never play football again?
So you hit on a good point. Age is a big deal. So as you get a little older, what, he's pushing 40, something like that? Pretty young, but in the world of sports, not young at all.
Right.
So that healing will take even longer. So there are concerns that he's got a 1/3 chance he's not coming back. Now we can dissect out. He's a quarterback.
Right.
He doesn't move anywhere like a running back or wide receiver. So when you start going through all the information and data, you can get lost in it. The reality is, though, if he may not be able to run the way he used to and get out of trouble the way he used to, that's part of his game.
Totally.
And he may not be able to do it anymore.
What is your biggest concern for Aaron Rodgers at this point after hearing all of this news about the injury in general?
I mean, the concern is for someone who signed a ginormous contract that he can never fulfill that contract. I think emotionally he is in trouble because he's a competitor. And to go down 4 plays into your career of this new team and franchise, it has to weigh on his mind really bad. And I'm not so sure what's the worst injury. Is it the Achilles? Surgeons will get him through that. That's pretty simple. Surgery, the therapists and the trainers will get him through the recovery. But oh my gosh, I just wonder psychologically how much of a hit he took.
Don't ever
never
return.
come back.
They
even a year later, the amount of explosive energy you need, they just can't get there. These again are devastating injuries. And by the way, those MRIs, pretty easy to make the diagnosis in the locker room or on the field. But sometimes with that MRI, you can just see how extensive that damage is. And so having repaired lots of Achilles tendon tears, sometimes you go in, it's nice and easy, it comes together. Boy, that was great. But sometimes it's just terrible tissue. And you say to yourself, I don't know if this athlete's going to come back or not. Just a devastating injury.
What does the process typically look like from now through the different steps? He's supposed to have surgery and then through that recovery process to the point where he could potentially return.
Yeah, so in the old days, we'd lock people up forever. We don't do that anymore. These repairs we do are very strong. The biggest concern they have is wound and infection, which they're going to be careful not to let that happen. And they're going to start him in therapy right away. So the difference between you and I maybe and these multi-million-dollar athletes is they have round-the-clock therapists and trainers working with them. We don't have that. So his recovery will literally mentally and physically start in the recovery room and thereon all the way through. And he will go through multiple stages. As the tendon heals, then the neuromuscular training starts. And that's where we divide out who's the 2/3 who come back from the 1/3 who will never come back.
And then going back to him, if he does make a return, you mentioned his legs being a key part of his game. Do you see, even if he returns, him ever being able to move like that? Is this something that athletes who tear their Achilles they find that they can never get back to that same level that they were once at.
And some can. It's amazing. Kobe Bryant and some of these other athletes, Kevin Durant, they can come back or move their game around. So the coaches in the NFL are amazing. So they're going to devise a scheme if they can, if he comes back, to maybe not let him run around too much. Stay in that pocket a little bit more. And I've said on this program for years and years, boy, you don't want to underestimate some of these athletes. Their genetic code, their desire, their drive, you know, you count them out, and they're not out. They just don't quit. So I think there's a chance if he can get back physically, they'll put a scheme around him to protect him, and over months and months in the next season, he'll come back to some degree, about 2/3 of a chance.
Yeah, and some of the athletes that we talk about at the quarterback position, they can run around, and if you take that away, their game is essentially nowhere near the same level. Of course, Aaron Rodgers with that arm, he's just as good with his arm without the legs.
There's no doubt. You say, well, if Tom Brady got hurt, his game is to not run around. He just stands in the pocket. He could withstand that. Lamar Jackson, maybe not. So as you move it around, he's so good that he can stay in that pocket and come back. So I would never count him out, not yet.
And I want to ask you, because this was something that has been thrown around within the world of the NFL, some players going to social media about this, the artificial turf, which the Jets had just installed a new artificial turf since Breece Hall was injured last year, and that was something that he was asked about in the locker room. One of the things that I saw that he had said after that was that grass is better. A lot of these players want grass fields. What is your take on that with these types of injuries?
So we have looked at this scientifically for decades. I like grass. It's nice and soft. When AstroTurf first came in, these artificial turfs, it was concrete. It was horrific. And they've tried to soften it ever since. I think one of the reasons we have so many injuries is you can get some good grip and you can really drive people. Therefore, the foot, if you get hit, doesn't slide. It doesn't move. It just grips and stays there. And so the ACLs are tearing more. The Achilles are tearing more and more injuries because your foot never slides. It just doesn't give way. It grips. So there is a concern, right, to try to make these artificial turfs safer. I don't know if they're ever going to do that, and the cost is prohibitive to put real turf back in these football stadiums.
Yeah, and also this was not a non-contact. A lot of times there's those conversations around non-contact injuries. This was obviously on a sack, so it's hard to tell whether that played a factor.
I looked at that picture, that one picture we talked about, and it doesn't make a difference what was on. His foot just got bent over, and his Achilles just had to tear.